I'm going to starting by introducing this project a little bit so that we can begin the conversation. But it will be a hybrid format where there's a presentation and then we're going to jump into conversations as we see fit with each of our partners on this project, and you'll be able to understand a little bit how this come about, and also answering the million-dollar question: now what? What do we do from this point on? Now what, right? So a while ago, Cameron reached out to me and said, would you all be interested in connecting with Joao and learning about how we can come together to support a research that Stand Earth is working on, Stand Earth, around the Amazon deforestation and the issues regarding the Amazon deforestation and its links to fashion and how fashion is related to all this. And of course, we were like, yes, this is absolutely something we want to work on. This is the kind of projects we want to be of service to. And so let's begin by looking a little bit at the ecosystem that Stand helped us understand, presented. And in the ecosystem here that I'm going to be sharing, I'm going to give the floor to Joao to just jump in as I slide through these different slides and to tell us a little bit why we started here in Brazil. You know, why do you do this work?
Perfect. Thank you, Celine. And thank you everyone for joining. It's super exciting to be here and speaking to you all. So I'm João Talocchi. I'm originally from Brazil. I was born and raised in São Paulo, in the southeast of Brazil. But I worked in the Amazon running a state government center for a few years, focusing on climate change and protecting the forest, and also thinking about innovation and so on. I also worked with Greenpeace for a number of years and had a big crash course in what needs to happen for the Amazon to be protected. And this is a very personal issue to me for a few reasons. One, I think a lot of people think of the Amazon as kind of like an empty green desert kind of thing, right? A lot of trees, a lot of animals, but not a lot of people. But no, there are millions of people living in the Amazon. A lot of them are indigenous peoples. A lot of them are just kind of like living there. Two is that the forest is a miracle, right? The idea that like evolution over millions of years would result in the display of life and color and connections that are important not just for the Amazon itself, but also for the rest of the world is just incredible. And unfortunately, as you can see on the map there, we're losing it really quickly. So deforestation started to happen in the Amazon relatively recently in around the 70s, when the Brazilian government encouraged people to kind of like go there and cut down the forest and just take the land and occupy the region. And it's going strong since then. But a lot of scientists have warned us, right? If we keep going, we lose another maybe 4% of the forest, it might enter a dry out cycle, right? Where the margins, kind of like where you see the red dots there, would be areas that would start to get drier and drier, and that could kind of like eventually expand to the entire forest, changing it from a rainforest more into like a savanna-like environment with very bad consequences for the climate, for biodiversity, for water cycles in the Americas, and so on. And next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know is that cattle production is the #1 cause of deforestation in the Amazon. Basically, the cycle of deforestation happens like this. People come in illegally and cut down the wood. So the most precious wood, a lot of it is sold. I'm speaking from Brooklyn. A lot of it's sold around here. You can see it on the High Line and so on. All this hardwood, it's cut down and shipped and sold internationally for a lot of money. Then they take down the rest, big chains, tractors, just put it all down and burn it. That's where you see the fire seasons and all those conversations that global media is picking up on. And right after they burn it, what they put? Cattle, right? There is no infrastructure, not a lot of roads, but cattle walk. So you can actually raise cows in this open lands and then ship it to different farms. And So Brazil has one of the biggest, or has the largest cattle herd in the world. A lot of them are in the Amazon. There's way more cattle than people in the Amazon. And it's this main driver, right? By selling cattle, these people that are cutting down the forests are making money. But I think the interesting part is that it's not necessarily contributing to the livelihoods of the poor farmers, right? It's contributing to a system where there's a lot of people, politicians, businessmen, who support the system and kind of like allow it to happen and support it happening. And leather itself is a big part of this, because while people might say, look, this is a byproduct, right? People are buying the meat and then the leather is just there. This is a very wrong assumption. Leather is one of the largest profit margins of the cattle industry. And because most of the meat stays in Brazil, but most of the leather gets exported, it's a huge source of revenue from Brazil. So the system kind of like pushes politicians, law enforcement agencies, governments, and companies to turn a blind eye to the deforestation that is happening. And in doing that, what they do is that they make the entire fashion industry an accomplice of deforestation, and everyone that's buying the products, right, become accomplices of deforestation. And I believe most of the fashion industry, but also its consumers, don't want to be a part of it, right? So a lot of the idea for this project came from seeing these connections, right? Cattle is the largest driver. Leather is a really important product that gets fed into supply chains that reach out the entire world. And the fashion industry doesn't want to be a part of this problem, can be a part of the solution, is incredibly influential and powerful in terms of the resources it has, but also the cultural appeal it has, and can make a difference. So I was lucky enough to get connected to Cameron, to Greg, to Celine, and kind of like we put together this, all the pieces, right? So there's research that really shows how the thing is happening that Standard Earth could bring together. And then there is the kind of like the campaign and the advocacy and the engagement of the fashion industry by all the different stakeholders here. And it was exciting to see it come to life and get media pick up and get a lot of you supporting the campaign. And I think there's a lot more that we need to do, but I think we're on the right path. And maybe I'll stop speaking now and let others take the stage.
Thank you so much, Joao. Thank you so much. This was a great introduction. Thank you for telling us the story, the backstory of all this, especially from your perspective. And we'll get back to you with additional questions very soon. I just want to make sure that here we pause and remember that, again, as you've mentioned, Joao, this isn't just a human, this is not just a climate justice issue. This is a human rights issue. And as you mentioned, that there are, over 200 communities, 400 communities or 200 communities. Remind me of the exact number. Oftentimes I get nervous on stage. It's 400.
It's over 200 communities, but it's not only them. Like this week, a couple was murdered in one of the kind of like land settlements in the middle of the Amazon for doing work to protect the forest. So like there's a lot of violence happening there towards traditional communities, local communities, or people that want to just do the right thing there. And so it is a big human issue.
Exactly. Oftentimes when we say it's a human rights issue, people think of themselves, like if the Amazon rainforest collapses, then I'm going to suffer because I won't get enough oxygen, or it's going to impact my environment. But it's important to notice that this, as you mentioned, this isn't just a green desert as it's portrayed. This is the habitat and the home of over 400 different communities. 400, see? Cameron was right. Now, going back to, not going back, but inviting Greg Higgs here from Stand Earth to, share a little bit with us. Greg, how did you manage to create these connections, to connect these dots once you started working on this research? How did Stand manage to really understand this correlation between beef, leather, fashion?
Yes. So are you showing your slides, or should I share my screen?
You can. I can stop sharing, and you can. Would you prefer that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Either way, actually, I can improv with yours.
No,
So
please
first,
share your screen if you prefer. Go ahead. So
okay.
just click on share screen and go full screen.
Okay, what I'm actually going to do is just share this portion of my screen.
Okay.
Be a little bit easier. And before I begin, Celine, you pointed out we didn't do introductions. Yeah, so my name's Greg Higgs. I live in Canada on traditional territory of the Snakes and Kantanaha people. I work with the group Stand.Earth, and really, I'm actually saying hello for my whole team, because it's four of us worked on this project for 6 months. And here's my team: Phoebe, Anjali, myself, and Angeline. And I'm going to show a lot of slides, but really quickly. First of all, I'll kind of walk through the thinking behind this, about how this ends up in the supply chain research. But starting with this slide that Celine showed, the Amazon forest loss, the question is, what's causing it? The single biggest driver of forest loss globally is cattle ranching. This map produced by the World Resources Institute, Global Forest Watch, shows that you can see the high concentration of deforestation from cattle in Brazil, particularly the Amazon. What really caught our attention was when my colleague Anjali did a carbon impact assessment. She did a literature review and consulted with lead scientists on these studies, and found that the deforestation just from the cattle ranching in just the Brazilian Amazon, that's excluding other sources of deforestation, that's ignoring other countries, just from cattle in just the Brazilian Amazon, is equivalent to 2% of all CO2 emissions, which is equivalent to the emissions from all airplanes flying around the world. It's kind of massive. And yes, it's an absolutely critical human rights issue and a biodiversity issue. And it connects to the hearts of many people, myself included. But wow, is it a huge climate issue as well. So we have all these different things: rainforest, fashion, cattle, deforestation, shoes, leather. How do we connect the dots? How do we bring simplicity to this complexity? Well, the first thing we do is lay it out like a line, even though it's not actually linear, because products tend to flow from one place to the other. And there's a whole piece we've done on deforestation side, but in the next slides, I'm going to focus on this part: how we track things from the leather that comes from the cattle to the brands that we're all familiar with. The first thing, this is kind of where the first people look at, is when you look at trade statistics, in this case, Brazilian export statistics, both through the United Nations. And you see where things go. And the first thing you see is, well, the biggest market's China, and then Italy and Vietnam. People often mistakenly say, oh, well, therefore it's China's fault. Well, it actually has nothing to do with China, because China's just a manufacturing hub, as is Italy and Vietnam and so on for the other countries. To really understand where this goes, we have to look beyond just the first country where the leather goes to. When we look on a company level, so these on the left-hand side, these are 6 of the biggest leather tanneries. That means the companies pre-processing the leather in Brazil, that are all tied to deforestation in the Amazon. If we look on a company level, we get a little bit clearer picture of the countries it goes to. But again, still, it's just the first tier. To go deeper, we have to really dig into the research. So this is, everyone loves bullet points. So here's a list of bullet points of where the data originates from, where we collect the data. It's of course, none of the data just tells you the answer. So it's a combination of data analysis and some element of sleuthing to really pull the pieces together and generate a picture. As we go through these 500,000 rows of customs data and other information from other public sources, and even some of the brands voluntarily disclose some of their first-year suppliers, when we put it together, we eventually created a database of over 400 individual supply chain connections. And when we visualize that, it looks like this. So it looks like a spider web, and it is. But what you see is at the top is deforestation leading all the way down to brands at the bottom, and they're a little hard to see there. So we have this slide. So this illustrates the brands, and some of them are grouped by parent company. You can see, for example, all these companies here, Wolverine, Morel, Cat, and so on, are all owned by the same company. VF Corporation owns North Face and Vans and so on, so they're grouped by company. And this list includes over 100 brands.
Yeah, and I would say pause here for a second and leave this slide up for a minute. That's where, when we were presented with this information, we, were thinking to ourselves, well, what can we do to hold these brands accountable for real? Because on one end, the instinct is just, let's call them out, and let's get them to be afraid of this report and to do something about it. What can they do about it? And Cameron and the Slow Factory and us, Cameron, with your team at Model Activist, we were in many conversations discussing culturally, systemically, from a policy standpoint, what can we do now that we have this information? I would love for you to jump on the call and I'll get back to you, Greg, don't worry, because there's so much more. But I just want to, since we're here with the brands, I know there's a lot. Okay, now that we see this, what do we do with all this? And so, Cameron, I would love for you to just explain to us some of your strategy behind pulling in some of the fashion insiders, and then I'll explain also some of the strategy the Slow Factory did in calling in these brands as much as possible. So please go ahead.
Sure. So some of my strategy was definitely informed by the other folks on this call. So I'm going to speak for sort of a collective conversation that was happening. We thought about, we looked at the really wonderful Pay Up campaign that Remake had done, and how they managed to call out many industry players and call them in to pay their employees and to pay the garment workers who were unpaid in the wake of COVID, basically through both shaming and then sort of celebrating people who did the right thing after being called out. So that was like a really wonderful model of how to hold a large number of people accountable, and the fact that they did it on social media with just, some influencer folks, but mostly just sort of their ambassador network of people online who care about what fashion is doing. And so that was kind of one model, and one strategy that we followed a little bit was thinking about how do we call out a big industry, name lots of names. And then I would say sort of internally, we thought a lot about really wanting to work with people that we know and be in complex long-term conversations. I think that's why Joao and Joao's team and Greg's team and all the folks who aren't necessarily from fashion came to you and I, is because we have those community, we have that community. And so, in the kind of internal conversation, one thing that I thought a lot about was that 18 years ago when I started modeling, they gave me a contract, and it had a little model registration form, and it said, will you wear lingerie? Will you wear fur? Will you do nudity? And those were your options of what boundaries you wanted to set, right? It didn't say will you wear cotton made by forced labor? Will you sell lingerie made by prison labor? Will you wear lingerie and consent to sexual harassment, right? There's so much complexity in all these issues. And I think it's so interesting that even 18 years ago, fur was on this list, right? But leather and all the associated impacts wasn't. And so I thought a lot about why is that we have these real specific things. And I think there's a lot of internal work that had to be done to get there. And actually, even while we were running this campaign, Elle banned fur and feathers, right? And so that internal work for us became an organizing strategy of trying to have as many one-on-one conversations as possible. I think a lot of times in social media era, we're thinking about okay, how many influencers can we get to sign up, and how big is the audience? So we're talking millions. Let's get it to 100 million people. What will that look like? And for us, we were thinking about like, how many conversations can we have in 5 months? And then who do we approach at what point? Who needs the research to be brought on board? Who wants to be brought in early? And if we have 200 one-on-one conversations and we're answering people's questions and we're building trust, can that translate on social media into the same type of trusted conversation that we see is so effective when it's led by what like marketing people call micro influencers? So we don't really need someone with 37 million people. But if we have a bunch of people who have 100 followers to 10,000 to 20,000, that's where people are speaking to a real trusted audience that they're in relationship with. So that was a little bit of that organizing strategy, and I'll stop there and you can come back to me if you have other questions.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Cameron. I just wanted to say that, again, leather is a very powerful material in the fashion industry. Towards the public, it symbolizes power, status. There's a lot of desire for purchasing leather because it's also associated with durability. It's associated with this investment that you're making for your wardrobe. And so, again, just going back to the investigation with Stand, when we first had the first initial results that Greg and his team was working on, the Slow Factory took those to a couple of brands that we had a relationship with and kind of tested them out as a field research and came back to Stand with very key questions or comments the brands would share with us. For example, leather is a byproduct of the meat industry and we have, you know, nothing to do with it, or we won't engage in illegal deforestation, to which we were like, okay, there needs to be education on the fact that illegal or legal deforestation is deforestation, and right now there's 90% of it being illegal. So how are you how are you sure you're part of the 10%? And so a lot of the field research that we've done in parallel to what Cameron was doing in the one-on-one series of interviews we've conducted were to kind of push the narrative further, if you will, and to being able to have an idea of what the PR one-liners that we're going to get before we went live with this campaign. So, you know, the illegal deforestation, whether it's about you know, our cows are made in the United States, and in doing a little research on that, there were a lot of loopholes on companies that owned cows in the Amazon rainforest and labeled them products of the United States. Now, Stan's research does not look into this, but that's something the Slow Factory wanted to dive deeper into. And again, just going back to this model, like looking at each of them, a lot of them were not even aware when we were approaching them that they had any ties whatsoever, because they didn't know that the company, the slaughterhouse or the manufacturing company they were working with was related to deforestation. And that education, doing that type of education internally, also helped us build the campaign, build these ties a little, like tell the story a little better. And then again, brands remained silent when we went online. And just before I go deeper into this section, I would love to give the floor to Teju, because as we were working on this, we came to Teju and said, so we have all this, can you help us research additionally, what would you do if this is the situation and brands were presented with these results? And Teju suggested, well, I think we should invest time and energy researching on good alternatives or better alternatives, like, because then it's fine to tell them you're involved with deforestation, it's your problem to fix it, but could we present brands with alternatives? And this was Teju's contribution. So Teju, would you want to jump on the line here and tell us a little bit about your research? I'll come back to this, and I'm just going to talk about that for a little minute, and I'll come back to why brands are silent and what kind of efforts we were doing to bring it back to Cameron and Joao.
Mm-hmm. Yes, first of all, when I was looking at some of the research that Stand Earth and Slow Factory did, I was trying to understand what it would mean for a company who believes in sustainability to change their supply chain that they know is not sustainable. And there are a lot of companies who are using sustainability as a word to describe the types of materials that they're using, but not looking deeply at their sourcing and labor violations and the displacement of biodiversity as well as communities. So a first question I had is, can there be sustainable leather production in general? Can it be truly sustainable? That is a question I'm still trying to answer, but there are more sustainable options. And one of the things that I did was I looked at the report from Sandearth, and along with my research assistant, Ruba Abu Nasser, we went through all these 100 brands and tried to locate their locations, where are their headquarters, where is most of their products being consumed, who are the people that they're selling to, and overwhelmingly, these companies had headquarters in the United States and Europe, although most of their supply chains and most of their sourcing was happening in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in other parts of the world that have less environmental regulations because of these trade agreements, that have lower wages that they have to pay because of currency devaluation, and also have so much of the world's resources and biodiversity, such as forest cover and space and land, and all of these things that we all need to continue to live on this planet. So I looked at certain stages of the leather production process and sourcing. Where is it coming from? Where are the tanneries that it's going to? What are the tanning processes that are currently used? What is the scale at which this is happening? And when we look to the actual cows that are creating the meat and the leather byproduct, how are they grazed? Is this land that should be used for farming? Is this land that used to be forest? Is this land, is there enough space for the cows to graze in a way that is climate beneficial? Because there are grazing practices that can help sequester carbon, that allow cows to be healthy and stress-free, which a lot of them are not. And so when you look at all of these parts of the process, from just the cows and the land to how the leather is actually being processed and turned into the leather that we see in shoes and handbags, there are different ways that we can understand how to make those processes more sustainable. And so I wanted to think about a huge issue in our supply chains in general, which is that they are globalized. And most of our products are traveling thousands of miles, much more traveling than any of us will ever do in our lifetimes, and going to several different countries before they actually come to us. And in addition to that, most of the leather that we're consuming in the US and Europe is not at all manufactured or produced here in any way. The final product ends up in our stores, but all of the pollution, all of the damage, all of the environmental violence is happening outside of this geography where the leather is being consumed. So some ways to understand if leather was more sustainable: looking at the actual life of the cows and how they're grazing and how they're living on the land, looking at the land, whether it should be forest, whether it should be used for farming, if it was cleared, how much of it was cleared, and then also looking at where this is actually taking place and where the final product ends up. And so as I was going through the process of finding alternatives, I realized that there were not many alternatives because it's so hard to compete with the cheap sourcing of leather that people can do when they source from places like JBS and all of these other organizations that are sort of in the Amazon. It's hard to compete when you're having cows sort of here on US soil. So when I was looking for companies that were producing leather in a more sustainable way, in a more ethical way, I first looked at where it was being produced. Where are the cows? What kind of land are they on? How much land are they on? And then secondly, what is the tanning process? You can do vegetable tanning, which is a lot slower. It's a smaller scale, but it doesn't produce any as much chemicals. It doesn't pollute waterways. And if it's done on a smaller scale, you could also use natural dyes when dyeing leather. And so in order to get some information about these companies that are using more alternative and ethical practices, I called them, I sent emails, I looked at their website, I looked at reports, if there were any information about maybe court documents or anything that they released, I tried to find. And believe it or not, most companies did not respond at all. Companies who said sustainable leather, ethical leather, domestically sourced leather did not respond to any of my queries. Most people did not want to answer my questions. And even the companies that seemed to have more of a sustainable supply chain didn't want to share with me what made it sustainable, because not only is this sort of opaqueness in supply chains that you don't really know what's happening, but there's also this sort of secrecy and not wanting people to steal your supply chain. So I couldn't actually verify a lot of companies who were doing alternatives. And one of the issues that I had with companies who were doing alternatives was that they could not compete with the scale. And so it's not only about changing and transforming our supply chains, as well as reshoring them, bringing them back to the geographies in which they're consumed. It's also that we need to support the sort of descaling of the leather industry in general. We consume too much leather in general. And so it's never going to be sustainable at the scale that it currently is. So I'll just stop there, but I will say there are some alternatives in this sort of supplemental report. It's really just an overview of the issue with some examples of alternatives to give brands an idea that you can change your supply chain and also support those who are creating new, more sustainable leather supply chains.
Thank you so much, Teju. I'm going back to, why are brands silent, and bringing it back to Cameron very quickly and to Joao as well. For those of you who want to read Teju's research, it's in the chat. It was shared by Nicole. It's on our website. And again, the goal of this research is to show brands that in fact there are solutions and they can absolutely make a positive change. When we went to them as a Slow Factory, we presented them with the issue, but we also presented them with several solutions, and one of them is on the website, is to put their name on a letter for legislation pushing the Brazilian government to basically create policies around deforestation. Joao, can you explain a little bit more to us what that meant? Why brands? Why not the public? Everyone was asking, well, I want to sign that letter. And why did we specifically focus on brands, and what strategic decision was behind that?
Yes, thank you, Celine, and thank you everyone for keeping the Q&A live. I think they're great questions there. So deforestation is a systemic issue, right? The way Teju was explaining it, right? You have cows that are raised as calves in one farm, and then they move to another farm by truck, and then they move to another one to get fat. And then maybe at the day before they go to slaughterhouse, they go to this one farm, right? That is all legal and it's got all its papers, get marked there, and go to the slaughterhouse and then enter the global supply chain. And the slaughterhouses in Brazil say, oh no, we buy only deforestation-free leather because our direct final suppliers are all in compliance with our deforestation-free mandates. But they acknowledge that they do not trace back to the origin of the cows. And that's the problem. And if you get to a brand, right, any brand, as large as Nike and Adidas, or as small as Dr. Martens, I think that's a large brand too. Sorry if anyone here is from Dr. Martens. It's virtually impossible for them to trace back to the farm, right? Unless they hire thousands of people and put them in the Amazon and keep seeing it. It is not a problem that they can solve. It's a problem that the slaughterhouses and the Brazilian government need to solve. So we need to create the conditions and the pressure that make sure that these guys make it a priority to solve this problem. So there are a few things that can be done, right? The brands can very clearly say it very loud and for everyone to hear, we are not going to accept any deforestation in our supply chains. And they can take research like this that we put on us to create, and go to their suppliers, right? All those maze of suppliers, and say, if you keep putting me in risk of buying deforestation, I'm not going to buy from you, right? That message needs to be loud and clear. And this is not in 2030. This is now. And if they act as a group, right? If the brands come at it together, there's only as many suppliers of leather out there in the world, they can make a change. And this will be important. One thing that I learned on the research is that Italian leather, all this fancy Italian leather, is not Italian. right? It's processed in Italy, but there's no space for all these cows to be raised, born in Italy. It's a lot of it is Brazilian leather that went to Italy and then enters the supply chain. So Italy would have an incentive also to do it. And this is being discussed, right? How can countries do this and brands do this? So in the US, in Europe, in the UK, but also in New York State and California State, there are a number of bills being proposed, which are called due diligence obligations, right? So if you are importing a product that's at high risk of deforestation, you would have to certify that this project is not contributing to deforestation. And the way that this would happen is if the slaughterhouses, the people putting this product in the market, can guarantee this to you. So this pressure needs to grow. And if the industry as a whole can support these bills and say, look, we want this to happen because we don't want to be a part of the problem. We want to be a part of the solution, but we cannot solve the problem by ourselves. But acting together, we can guarantee that there's one system that is easy for everyone to be in compliance with, that's regulated. We don't need 20,000 different certifications to monitor this. And let's make it even simpler, right? Let's not discuss legal or illegal, because legal or illegal, 1% of the deforestation alerts in Brazil get any attention. Basically 95 to 96% of all deforestation is illegal, but there's satellites in the sky showing us almost in real time where deforestation is happening. And we know where the slaughterhouses are, right? They're dotted there. So the process could be, if there is deforestation around the catchment area of these different slaughterhouses, and then that gets into my supply chain, I cannot buy from you. And this would force the slaughterhouses, who have people on the ground, who know the farmers and the dynamics, to go to the people there and say, look, we kind of have to cut it out. Stop cutting down the forest because you are putting my business at risk, right? And continue to support the folks there. There's many things that can happen. The Brazilian government can definitely come up with other industries and other ways of supporting the population that don't contribute to the destruction of the forest. By the way, the areas with most deforestation have the lowest human development indexes in Brazil. So it's not that it's helping development. Very opposite, it's bringing violence. And so like the systemic changes that we need industry to back, right? We need a bill to be approved in the United States. We know how powerful industry is to that, because then what? You get maybe some Republicans to vote for it. We need these bills to be approved in Europe. But I don't know, maybe the Italians or the Spanish are going to be like, I don't want this thing because it will put me in trouble and my businesses. And if the industry is behind it, it can actually happen. And they can also send messages to the Brazilian government, right? That is now, someone discussed on the Q&A, the package of destruction that's being discussed. A lot of laws that basically try to legalize more deforestation. And if they message, if people, we did this with this campaign, right? At some point, we were asking people to communicate directly with the Speaker of the House or the Brazilian Senate. Any work, they took it out of the voting roll at the end of the year. Now it's all back, and it's all a priority. And just yesterday or 2 days ago, they approved on the Congress a bill that basically makes agrochemicals easier to get approval and be used in Brazil. And the laundry list of bills that would weaken all the Brazilian environmental regulations is coming quick. It's got political support. And I think the fashion industry and fashion stakeholders around the world can have a really important role into shutting that down until there's better political conditions in Brazil to tackle deforestation.
I would also just add that in countries like the US, which is a huge imperial power, huge fashion industry, and Europe, there are also ways that people can create pressure for trade agreements that are creating situations that incentivize countries like Brazil to not have environmental regulations, to not have laws about deforestation. And again, as we know from this country, legality is not a moral compass. Slavery was legal at the time. Most chocolate is made with forced labor. So it's not about legality, right? It's about that we all live on this planet. And in order to survive, we need the Amazon forest. And so it is all of these different systems, it's trade agreements, it's brands, and it's also consumers. So just like we have community organizing, we could have consumer organizing. And I know that Celine and maybe Cameron are going to talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to add that it is on national level, corporation level, and on a nation state trade agreement level as well.
Maybe I'll take this opportunity to just jump on what Teju and Joao were saying. Joao was talking about a little post that we did in the end of December that got shared a couple thousand times, targeting this speaker who was trying to legalize deforestation. And Teju speaking about consumer organizing. So a couple thousand shares scared this legislator into making his account private, and potentially was the tipping point for rescheduling the vote. A couple thousand shares is very accessible to us as organizers. I mean, on this call already, there's 200 people, right? So if all of us share it, this is a huge, potentially huge impact. So we have to actually act as the watchdogs for the Brazilian government, where we really need international support in this moment. Their president is like, you know, Trump. He's like the Trump of Brazil. So we have to be in solidarity in a global community, providing that international pressure in this moment. And I would add, you know, part of the reason I think we didn't see brands respond right away is really because they didn't get canceled. You know, all these brands who want to be sustainable, who say they want to be sustainable, primarily they want to sustain their business model. And so we have to make the choice of sustainability around sustaining their business model, and say this is unacceptable, and you can't sustain your business model if you continue this unsustainable behavior. And so I think as we move forward, we're all going to work on trying to find ways, trying to find those actions that make it easy entry points for consumers, for interested folks, and really, like, you know, playing this inside outside game as a team sport, not antagonistic. I think what Selena and I saw, and what we can speak to, is really seeing the constellation of people inside fashion who want to do different. And we spoke to sustainability VPs and sustainability editors, and, you know, various folks who align themselves with the climate movement and say that and do that as their job every day, who really just said to us, our hands are tied. And so the inside outside game is we need in public to provide the pressure for them to be able to take these issues up their sort of corporate hierarchy. And then also, I think, perform some of that risk taking so that they feel like they're in good company. Like, okay, those folks over there are taking risks, so now I take a risk. And this becomes a culture of us putting so much on the line, because really everything is on the line for the people who we are trying to be in solidarity with. And so it requires some bravery and I think performance of bravery in public. And so I think that's what will happen next a little bit.
Absolutely. And just piggybacking on the inside outside game that you mentioned, which is very much the strategy that the Slow Factory likes to look into, not just calling them in, calling them out, asking our community. That was part of the last town hall that we did with Slow Factory. We basically asked our community, here are the brands, this is what we would need to say to them. Can you all take this Instagram app, go online, pick any brand, write a comment? And again, we would love to ask you to do the same, because that kind of inside outside game is very, very strategic and important, and has created a lot of movement, a lot of changes in the fashion industry. There's also here in the chat, Krista has shared a document of some of our campaign designs that we've produced for by the Slow Factory with the work that Stand Earth created. If there's any of them that inspire you, if you can push those on your social media platform, on your grid, on your timeline, that would help a lot create just the conversation, the kind of movement that we're looking to create. Because as some of you may know, Slow Factory has done a series of campaigns between the end of the 2021 year and the beginning of 2022, and we have lost our account. We have been shadow banned. Currently, we are being shadow banned, targeted by bots. So it's not efficient anymore for us to post, but if you all post, that will help us a lot for this movement, for this campaign, particularly this work that Stand Earth created. And for instance, this Monday, an article by the New York Times came out talking about this work that we are doing. So it's still relevant into the conversation. So a comment, for instance, that can sound like, on Monday, there was a New York Times article that came out, something that you can leave underneath, Zara or H&M. On Monday, there was an article in the New York Times that came out linking fashion and deforestation. What is your brand? And your brand is one of the leading brands tied to deforestation. What are you doing about it? And I think my team at Slow Factory, Krista, Nicole, if you can just base some of the ideas of the things that we've commented already to prepare for this panel. And we've already started seeding this kind of activity on social media. If you want to just copy paste, that's what we did the other day when we touched base together on the town hall. And we started just going at it and creating a conversation, because that's what social media is about. It's a conversation with these brands, holding them accountable. So the work is happening inside, the work is happening outside, and that is key for what we are trying to create. Again, going back to Teju's research, are there solutions? And finishing with how can we impose change? So just the last note on are there solutions, Teju, just a little bit more on the framework that you used for talking about for researching these brands and developing a framework. Your work has been deeply tied into soil, into fiber, into geographies. How did you put all that together to put together the framework that you've applied? And just after you're done, we're going to open the conversation to everybody to discuss, okay, so what happens now?
Mm-hmm. I just want to preface that this is very much like a mini research. It is absolutely supplemental to the work that Stand Earth did in collaboration with the Slow Factory. And so really, I was just trying to look at an overview of the issue and connect some of the dots at a higher level for folks to see, like, if you're buying shoes or handbags, is this related to a system that is destroying the Amazon and destroying the earth? So a lot of it was like looking at where leather goes, how many places it goes to, as well as the conditions in which the cows live, as I already mentioned, and the type of land specifically that the cows are on. Because again, there's a shortage of arable land for farming and food. So while it's also contributing to deforestation, it's also contributing to food apartheid in these communities as well. There are over 400 communities in the Amazon, as folks already said, and some of these communities are the last communities on Earth that have the most sustainable lifeways. There are communities that literally have lifeways that are thousands of years old, that are more related to hunter and gatherer lifestyles than our current lifestyles right now. So it's not just about sustainability of the planet, it's about sustainable lifeways that are also being disappeared by this leather industry, this billion-dollar leather industry. So the framework was people, planet, and economy. And how does this tie into sort of hundreds of years of unequal trade and resource extraction from places like Brazil, which was a former colony of Portugal, which at the onset of Portuguese colonization, tons of land was cleared for plantations in Brazil, right? So this land clearing that has been happening for 200 years has never been sustainable, and the leather industry is contributing to it and reinforcing this sort of extraction of resources and animals that has not been sustainable and has not been sustainable for a while. So looking at the history of how we create our products in the West and where most of those resources come from, looking at smaller scale alternatives in this country and what they're trying to do to compete with the larger scale leather industry and how they economically cannot compete with leather that's coming through these supply chains. And then also thinking about how people are talking about their products. So I see one of the questions is, if someone says it's made in Italy, is it really made in Italy? How do you know? Well, you actually don't know. You just have to trust that it is made in Italy. And so the way that I tried to get more information on that was to ask companies, can you share with me the whole process from the cows to the end product or to when you export it to the US? And a lot of companies did not want to share that information. So I was really asking these questions, not just about how the leather is made, but really from the land that it's on to the cows, to our handbags. And so I will just lastly say that so much of having alternatives is supporting smaller scale leather tanneries, leather producers, and leather suppliers that exist in the US and in Europe. They cannot compete with the scale, and the scale is part of the problem. So I definitely wanted to bring in that element of supporting smaller scale creators, makers, suppliers, sourcers in general. And I'm sure some of the questions that are asked about vegan leather being better or leather being made from fruits or vegetables, I could answer those later or now, depending on what you think is best, Celine.
I'm on mute. I just wanted to go through a little bit, just if you can save that response or that answer for just a couple more minutes as we go through this. So, again, going back to the inside, outside, understanding this, the main question is that, okay, now you all know this, we know this, we have this report, what do we do from here? There's a lot of work that we can do collectively. Collective action is very important at this point. When we, again, just going back again, the public shaming work, we're going to discuss this again together. When we went and discussed these research findings with the brands, we were faced with some kind of PR ready-made sentences like, our leather is from the United States, our cows are from the United States, can you prove it? The answer is no. Our leather is from Italy, can you prove it? The answer is no, because there is a big opacity when it comes to supply chain. And just before we move forward into the questions culturally about, is public shaming going to work in this situation? Can we continue to push it? I just wanted to open it up again to Greg regarding the idea about supply chain. Like, the work that you all did was against all odds because supply chains are so opaque. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that and how you were able to go and deeper than brands could, even when it comes to supply chain?
It is ironic that an NGO can go deeper than the companies can, but that, it's because the industry is not set up in a way that encourages them or allows them to do so. They have no, financial incentive to understand their supply chains. All they want is the cheapest possible, product that they can get on a, or on a regular basis. So we pulled together information from so many disparate sources, Brazilian customs data, Indian customs data, Indonesian customs data, also Philippines, Pakistan, Mexico, and United States, and all there, and plus 18,000 rows of supplier disclosure documents, plus countless annual reports and investor presentations, many of them in Chinese, we had to translate. It's a lot of information, and what company has the luxury to actually do that kind of thing or the know-how? They don't. So it's really not our job to be doing this. It's really their job, actually. But what the study shows is that through 6 months of work, we found this connection to 100 brands. That doesn't mean that if you're not on our list, then everything is fine. It just means we haven't found the connection. Basically, the entire fashion industry is complicit in this issue, and they have to take ownership. And they have to take this research that we've started, as an illustration that with effort, you can find out your supply chains, and really, you have to do a lot more than just say we care. It's the sake of the entire planet really is at stake here. Yeah.
Absolutely, and we found ourselves even saying these things when we were in meetings behind closed doors in front of a C-suite of very important stakeholders, given the brand, and we were the ones being like, this is not enough, we need more action, and this is, everyone here is involved, and our future collectively. And it was very moving. In fact, we were moved, they were unmoved. But so to that point, can we shame them into action? These are the questions I would like to answer. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to go back into what you were saying, Teju, very quickly, and I will open up the floor to Q&A. Some Q&A that Joao, you've answered, I've heard from my team in writing, but I'm going to have to ask you to answer in with your voice. So before we jump into can we shame them into action, which I would love Cameron to answer. Teju, do you want to jump in and just conclude on what you were saying regarding your research?
Yeah, I'll just say that vegan leather is a lot of times talked about as an alternative. And so we also have to be clear if an alternative is actually alternative or if it's just a different way of creating a violent system. So a lot of vegan leather is made from plastic, which is a petroleum-based product, which is part of this large oil industry. And of course, the only industry bigger than fashion and pollution is the oil industry. So vegan leather is not necessarily more sustainable than natural leather if it's made by petroleum for a plastic product. And there are some alternatives that are a little more sustainable, such as using mushrooms, such as using coconut skins. But again, they become unsustainable if their scale is large. So if you're cutting down trees to grow coconut trees, then it's not sustainable. If you are tearing up the forest to plant more mushrooms to make vegan leather, it's not sustainable. So really, we have to think about the scale in general at which we're consuming things. Anything that is done in monoculture, meaning you're clearing forests to plant one product in that place, is not going to be sustainable. Also, if you're planting a coconut tree in Nebraska, for example, it's not sustainable because coconut trees are not native to Nebraska. So it's not just about it not being a live animal, because plants are alive too. So if you're also producing monoculture with plants, such as cotton, as we know from cotton's history, it's not sustainable. So really think about how things are made, where they're made, and who's making them, and what is the possibility for this happening over generations. If it can't happen over generations without producing more carbon emissions, then most likely it's not truly sustainable and it's not actually an alternative.
Wow, Teju, thank you so much for your thoughtful answer. And I agree, we agree here at the Slow Factory that monoculture and mushroom leather, although sounds really amazing, do rely on industrial agriculture to being able to scale at all. And yes, mushrooms are amazing for the environment, but not in that process and not in that way. You've laid it out so perfectly. And again, on plastic leather, which is pleather, which is vegan leather, all of these words are, again, as you said, it's basically a product, not even a byproduct, a product of the fossil fuel industry. So of course, it's going to have a lot of support when it comes to marketing and media attention. And even like, it's such a great marketing tool to say it's a vegan leather. It's basically like tops everything else and creates this rise in sale, which creates a large demand for it. And again, what are we looking at here? It's more plastic emitted into the environment. So thank you for saying that. I would love to open up the floor to you all. Cameron, please take it from here. Can we shame them into action? And I already see amazing responses in the chat by Sarah Waxman. But just before we start reading Q&A and chats, please tell us from your perspective how it's been, and can we shame them into action?
Yes, we can. I love this question. Absolutely, we can shame them into action. We have seen the last 2 years shaming work incredibly well to transform the industry. We saw it work when we found out that a fifth of the world's cotton was being sourced from forced labor in China, and nearly every major company named had a statement out the next day about what they were going to do. And the follow through has started to happen in mixed ways, but it's a very live conversation because of the enormous stigma around that, right? And I think we saw it with pay up that we talked about earlier, that we saw shaming work incredibly well. You can't not pay people for the work that they did. And so I think shaming will work really well. And I think it's a really wonderful place to direct our anger. And I think it's a wonderful way to reimagine cancel culture. The way that cancel culture has worked on many companies and other industries has been so powerful over the past few years. Like, I think immediately of like Uber, kind of in the beginning of like the Donald Trump era, being canceled and that transforming the ride sharing landscape. And there's so many examples to go into, but I think that canceling companies is a brilliant way for consumers to affect this. And we don't need that many people to do it. It doesn't require millions of consumers. It requires maybe 1,000 or 2,000 people active in the conversation online. And so I think this is totally achievable. And that will be a wonderful kind of phase 2 that we'd love to see, a real collective energy. So if there's folks on this call who feel like they are engaged in and want to be part of this phase two, especially if you're starting to understand how you can be like a node and an organizer in your community, be it your university or inside your company or just in your friends and family. I think reach out to us because you should be part of this next effort, and we really are excited to broaden the sort of coalition as we continue to build. So it was wonderful to be with you all here today. Thanks, Celine.
Of course, I'm sorry, I'm writing in the chat an example of a comment that one can leave, you know, and you know, and stop deforestation. If you are pointing out and writing comments, please use the hashtag supply change, like supply chain, but supply change. So I just put in the chat here an example if you all want to go and use your power, this individual power that we all hold and have in terms of putting that anger into action, as you said so well, Cameron. And again, I'm just going to go back to the questions, the Q&A that Joao, you sent as a written response, but if you don't mind to say them out loud. How will the destruction package in Brazil affect deforestation related to cattle, leather production? That was one of the...
Okay, so yeah, the Brazilian government is trying to legalize a lot of deforestation, right? They're seeing companies, they're seeing these bills being approved or being discussed in other places. And so what they want to do is not deal with the problem, but just make it legal. So the way it would impact things is that it would give everyone a free pass, right? The government, the traders, and everyone else would be like, oh, no, look, it's not illegal, but deforestation will continue, violence will continue, and all of these things. So it's really important that this package doesn't pass, because regardless of who the next president, governors, and congressmen will be, this would be a very, very bad legacy that this government would leave. And I just wanted to speak to the point on canceling. Someone made a comment that, like, how can we push these brands to act collectively, right? The stuff that I was talking before. And you need to get someone to start the process, right? One or a few brands need to kind of like come together and invite all the others to take collective action. And I think that while we're yelling at everyone and saying, hey, all of you, you're all part of this problem, everyone's kind of like, I'm not going to stick my head out there because I'm going to get a club to the head. But if a few brands are selected and they're put in a position where they have to answer because like their brand is being damaged, that would enable them to kind of like take this courageous step and start to deal with the problem. Clear example, the soy moratorium, which is a similar thing that what we're trying to do. It started more than a decade ago in Brazil, and it started because Greenpeace shamed McDonald's, right, into saying, look, your chicken is eating soy that's contributing to deforestation in Brazil. You need to sort this out. And McDonald's went to everyone else that was named in the report and saying, I'm not going down alone. You all come here and we're going to solve this together. And so collectively, they brought all the traders in, the Cargills, Bunge's, ADMs of the world, and they created a system working with civil society, with the Brazilian government, with the traders, with the farmers, that really helped, right? Stop deforestation for soy. The problem is that soy went into the lands that were already open by 2008 when this was created, and then pushed cattle to the frontiers of deforestation, right? So now we need one to stop cattle. And soon we're going to need one to stop gold mining. That's another driver that is
cobalt.
And cobalt and nickel and all the minerals for wind turbines that we also care about.
I just want to jump in very quickly that it's not a yes or, it's a yes and. We need inside outside. So I'm reading some of the chats being like, they're going to make an inauthentic, statement and so on. When we first called the brands in, when Slow Factory went in and said, look, there's going to be a report coming out soon. Here's the report. You're in it. Can we talk about you changing that? Some of our insiders were like, why don't you just cancel them? That's going to help us. If you cancel them, it's going to move the needle internally, because right now I don't have that power. But if the public speaks out and the public shames them, the brand, then we can move into action, because right now they're not going to do it just because So Factory asked. And that's when I again went back to the team and said, okay, this is what we're hearing, and we need to go at it. We need to create something that's going to create a positive change. But at the same time, the Slow Factory has an inside outside kind of position as a diplomatic, entity. We need other people to join us as well, because we can call them out, we can cancel them, but we get our account targeted, then we lose the platform, then we are not as effective, and therefore our voice is kind of like into the void of this algorithm of oppression where it's not doing anything. We can't be the only ones doing this. So that's why we're sharing the assets, we're sharing some of the text, and I think phase 2 is going to be to create a coalition, right? Cameron, you can jump in on that, to support this network, because otherwise we're an ecosystem in and of itself. We're going to have to work inside outside as much as possible, because otherwise it's not just going to happen with one strategy. It's like a multiple strategy over here that we're trying to develop.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I think that's so important to say, that shaming and canceling is still an inside-outside game. And to reiterate what you said, we went to insiders and they said, cancel us, because that's the leverage that we need. So that actually was a result of those conversations as we tried to think about how we might go forward. And for phase 2, I think one of the things that we also learned was some of this language, right? Like shaming and canceling, and even, Celine and I, who are seen in a more activist light inside the industry, that in itself has become a little bit stigmatized. And so part of that coalition building is to say, hey, hey, producer that wants to do sustainable work, hey, PR firm that's focusing on sustainable work, we want you in this conversation, because we want you to help us hold our mutual clients accountable. And it's not just the one or two folks who are constantly ringing the bell here. It's actually all of us very, very concerned with an issue that isn't, a sort of 90s slogan that the fashion industry waved, or, in 2019, we actually saw many of these brands make commitments around deforestation because fires in the Amazon were going viral. And we need something different than that. And it's not going to be a single day shamed on social media. It's actually asking them to work in a deeper way. And what's beautiful, I think, is that there is the inside outside. So there actually are now people strategically placed in a lot of these firms to have this conversation in a more long haul way, that even 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't even have a sustainability VP working there. And so, I think sometimes and in this moment where I think it can feel like we're losing, I think we don't always know when we're winning and losing. And I think we're seeing a lot of the infrastructure, human infrastructure, be built that actually might suggest that we're about to win, or that we're on our way to winning. And so that's kind of the hope that I hold. And I was joking, using the cancel culture words and the shaming words, because they're silly, and also big companies can handle it,
Yes, and most of the time, just before, I just want to answer that most of the time they even have a budget for all this canceling. They have a budget for, the boycotts. And again, it impacts a lot of the debt stock that this is going to create. It's kind of like a mess in a way, but just that to say, we need a collective effort. We cannot just rely on the shoulders of one group. And again, as Cameron said, we're stigmatized, and it's very easy to shush us and brush us off, or to be like, okay, they're going to cancel us, then they're going to not talk to us anymore. And that's not a good position either. You wanted to say, Teju, and then we go to a question.
Yeah, I just noticed that in the chat, some folks are saying, well, wouldn't they just put out another statement that's inauthentic? But now we have folks like Stand Earth and Greg's team who can actually research and analyze if what they're saying is true. So they can say whatever they want, they can greenwash, but we actually have folks who can research and look at the supply chains and show all the evidence and proof that what they're saying is not true. So now they can't just create statements, they have to show evidential proof that they are actually doing things in a sustainable way. So it's having researchers and research teams like Stand Earth in tandem to model activists, in tandem with consumers, all of us together, you can't fight evidence and community and research. All of that together is what makes this the most effective campaign that it could be.
100% with you on this. You know, we hear oftentimes, we're gonna hold them accountable. This is what it looks like. This is actively holding this group accountable. There's a question here that, Joao, you've answered by text that we would love to hear you explain. So someone said, for sure it's a lucrative business, but there are studies that in India a huge quantity of cow skin is thrown away to landfills. So why is it better to throw away, to not use the best material for footwear in terms of performance, weather, transpiration, etc.?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question. And to me, the issue is we shouldn't be throwing leather away. But no cows should be contributing to deforestation, right? There shouldn't be deforestation happening, and we shouldn't be buying products that are connected to deforestation, which supports them. But the solution to the problem is not having the product exist or throwing it in the trash, is making sure that there's no incentives to open the forest and continue to cut down the forest, and blocking any of the products, right? The cow, the leather, the meat, the bone, marrow, everything from being purchased. So you kind of like cut the source of finance and the incentive to destroy.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Martins claims sustainability is the production process, yet makes its way through as a high risk on the list. What needs to be done when their very business model revolves around the core issue of scale, basically?
I think we discussed this, right? Get the companies together, act as an industry, use your purchasing power, your force, your influence to message that no deforestation is going to be accepted, to act and make sure that no deforestation is really accepted, support the types of legislation that's good out there and will help stop deforestation, and message to the Brazilian government that like you're not going to be fooled by their attempts to basically legalize forest destruction. Yeah.
I would also say support smaller suppliers, sources, makers, creators who are doing this at a smaller scale in a regenerative, climate beneficial, sustainable way. So moving away from supporting these big brands to supporting smaller brands that their core goals is to produce in a more sustainable way. So I think it's about expecting brands and corporations to transform and also supporting others who are already trying to create more sustainable production of leather in general.
Absolutely. And then a question for Teju. What are your thoughts on leather that comes from regenerative agriculture? If cows coming from Switzerland are regeneratively grazing in the Alps and actively contributing to sequestering carbon back into the earth, could this be good leather?
Yes, that could be good leather, as long as after these Swiss cows in the Alps, that they're not sent to Vietnam, right, to get tanned in a chemical facility that pollutes the waterways in Vietnam, and then are sent back to Switzerland to be turned into bags. So I think, again, it's about the region, how much carbon emissions and transportation, as Joao was saying, like, why are cows being carried from one farm to the next farm to the next farm and then being tanned thousands of miles away and then sent back? So I love everything that you said in those first stages of the process, and also continuing to look at every stage. And the folks who are grazing them in this climate beneficial way, do they have right livelihoods? Are they treated well? Can they take care of all the cows and themselves and their families? Those are other things to think about as well. But so far, that sounds pretty regenerative.
Perfect. And a question for Greg, Joao, and Cameron. How can we find out more about the maize-like supply chain that connects much of the fashion industry to Brazil's leather that comes from deforestation? I would love to understand who the political players are, aside from consumers voting with their dollars, as much of the sustainable fashion is sold to do. How can we know how our greater votes are contributing to this problem?
There's a lot to that question. maybe I'll that's something, maybe Zhao, you can finish it, but and for the supply chain piece, go to our website where you can actually explore. It's an interactive website. You can click on company names and move around and see all the connections. How it connects to politics and this that gets more complex. And Zhao, I know you have some things to say.
I was gonna say, like, we are putting out resources. The stand and also the Slow Factory websites are really good areas to go for this. Read more, get informed, come back to us with questions. Follow the hashtag on social media. We're gonna continue to be active there. And yeah, I say that's it.
And in the United States, there's the Forest Act, right, on a federal level. And in New York, there's the New York Fashion Act. So there are some efforts at due diligence legislation, and you can follow who is supporting those, and if they're being watered down or given teeth. That's more complex, but it's wonderful to have people following that conversation and sharing about it.
Absolutely. And we have only about 10 minutes left. There's so many more questions. Maybe we can think of connecting together. I'll share the Q&A. We can respond together, and we can create maybe an addition to the FAQ on the page that we created for this campaign. In the last 10 minutes, I would love to just read the room a little bit. Was this something that was inspiring for you all? Can we count on you to help us create pressure on these brands? Again, what happens next is a big question oftentimes. Okay, now that we know that this report is out, one of the the things I would like to add is that having this report holds these brands accountable in ways that they can't just go about their day and send us these greenwashing statements or these campaigns where they're in the Amazon and walking and doing trekking in the Amazon or whatever they're going to do after this report comes out. This report helps us to document the work that's been done in 2021, 2022, as we continue monitoring the deforestation that's occurring in the Amazon rainforest. Just opening it up to you all. Is there a question that caught your attention or a comment from the chat? Can you just, in reading the room, what are your thoughts?
Hey, I'm just so moved to be here with this audience that is so engaged and brilliant. I mean, I feel like at least half the people who asked a question probably could have been on this panel, because y'all have a lot of insight and really wonderful ideas. And before we came on, Salim was saying, like, this is a really wonderful group to kind of brainstorm with and strategize with, because there's a lot of really informed participants. And so, in the chat now or through DM or email later, it's really wonderful to hear y'all's strategy ideas. How would you conceive of a phase 2 and get brands to reply to these very devastating reports? So I think it was just wonderful to be here with such an engaged audience and see where your minds are at, and look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you, Slow Factory team.
Yeah, completely second everything that Cameron said. Really good questions. I think a really good debate. We could go for hours and hours here. Finding the solution, as we discussed, is not really easy. But if there's anyone here that works in one of these companies, you're free to start this process of engaging other brands or really pushing them to do the thing that was new and different from these campaigns to others that I worked on as an environmentalist, is that we have the insiders here, right, pushing. And I think this is what is critical. It's people that the industry listens to, it's media that the industry pays attention to, and it's influence that can happen from the inside. So pushing, incentivizing, make sure this is a priority, make sure the dollars go into it, making sure that the folks that are trying to do the right things inside these companies have kind of like their backs or feel the pressure to be able to actually implement it. I'm sure there's a lot of people doing this work on the brands, right? And sometimes they need our pressure from outside in order to be able to do the things they want. So help them make this happen. And yes, let's keep collaborating. And thank you, of course, Slow Factory, for not only being a part of the campaign, but also putting this together.
And I also just hope that folks realize there are so many different angles from which to address this issue. National level, policy level, advocacy, consumer levels. Like, even if you're feeling daunted by how big this is, writing a comment under Nike's page is doing something. Calling your legislator is doing something. Supporting the Fashion Act is doing something. So there's so many different ways to deal with this issue. So I hope that whether you're a geologist or a designer or a psychologist, that you think about what you can do in your industry to make sure that deforestation is not happening, not through leather or through any other way. So just, there are many solutions to the problem. And so whatever way you can get at it, you should be inspired to do so.
That's true. Thank you, Teju. Thank you, Craig.
I would like to just read out one of the comments that somebody left, which I just really liked. It really resonated with me. They wrote, this was sobering and absolutely inspiring. That I find that such a potent mix, you know, because it is sobering and it is also inspiring. You know, it's sobering because that in one level, you know, on our heart level, that the issues facing the planet are so big, but there's something we can do about it. We can figure things out, and even the people in the companies, you know, I've been in calls with some of the companies that are actually considering taking action, and you know, and it's a good reminder, you know, for me and for all of us, that when we're talking with them, well, they're people too. They care about the planet, they care about their kids, you know, and we're all in this together.
Because we all live here, like we all live on planet Earth, you know, yeah. So ultimately we should care about our home, you know, we all live here.
Absolutely. And again, I remember one very specific moment where we were sitting with the C-suite of a specific brand I'm not going to name because I'm not ready for a legal lawsuit. And, you know, we were saying, they were just spitting at us, you know, PR sentences that they had pre-prepared, like there's no, you know, we don't engage in illegal deforestation and all of these things that really made no sense because they were showing us they were not ready to take action. And I remember very vividly me and my team and looking at each other on the camera and being like, but we are all involved in this. You understand that what you're not trying to do is going to affect you, your children, our children. And we found ourselves having such an emotional response when we were faced with almost bureaucratic robots, you know, and that's the fight that happens behind the scenes that I think is not translated into social media, where when we are outside, we see a lot of this stuff and it gets emotional, you know, behind the scenes. And I feel like, yes, we need to be able to have these conversations together like this, where we are brainstorming together. This isn't just something that we all know what to do with, you know, we are trying our best, doing what we can with the knowledge that we have, with the network that we have, with the skills that we have. And again, this goes back to you all. We need this collective action to happen from all of you. And I know the word activist has been stigmatized for so many years. You know, when you do something and you get targeted as an activist or a troublemaker or an advocate or whatever, it makes you feel like, oh my God, I'm standing out in the wrong way. I'm going to step down. But this is where we are asking you, to please lean in, be the creative troublemaker that we need here, because this is all good trouble for our collective wellness and our collective well-being. So again, I want to thank the audience, thank the community, the Slow Factory community, so much for all of your insights. We're going to save the chat. We're saving Q&A. We're going to regroup with the team here and answer some of the questions that we didn't manage to answer. And of course, thank you to our amazing panelists, and to Teju. Your research was incredible. Thank you for joining us with halfway through. And Greg, it's so good to be working with you again on this for phase 2. And Joao, thank you for trusting us. And Cameron, thank you for initiating this and trusting us and pulling us in. We are so deeply grateful for you, Cameron. And a big thank you to Sarika and Leah, our American Sign Language interpreters. It wasn't easy to interpret everyone talking here. And thank you, Nick, organizing this, for being our accessibility lead at the Slow Factory. Nicole, Krista, and Paloma, who's not here today. You are our rock when it comes to Open EDU. Thank you so much, Colin, for putting the research out yesterday and working through the last edits. And even Ruba, thank you so much for working on Teju's research. And on that note, thank you, everyone. Goodbye and take care.